Welcome to WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast. This episode was made possible by a generous sponsorship from the Healthcare Businesswomen's Association. For more information, visit hbanet.org. In this episode, Taryn Grome, editor-in-chief of Pharma Voice magazine, meets with Andrea Itano, Ph.D., Senior VP, Head of Research, Evelo Biosciences.
Dr. Itano, welcome to the WOW podcast program.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Me too. You are working in one of the hottest fields right now, autoimmune and inflammatory diseases. Tell me about what drew you to the scientific field and why this area is of such interest to you.
Yes, absolutely. Immunology is fascinating to me. The idea that too much of a good thing can be bad is played out really clearly in immunity and inflammation. So figuring out how to harness immune processes to do what we want therapeutically is, I think, one of the most intriguing scientific questions that there is right now. My first exposure to the field was from my first job in college. I had actually gotten my undergraduate degree in botany, but then I happened to find a job with a neuroscientist because actually I had to find a job and I couldn't find one in botany. So I found one with a neuroscientist studying inflammation in the brain caused by Lyme disease. And I was completely new to the whole field of human disease. And I was really struck by the observation that inflammation in one area of the body could have much broader systemic effects. So when I went back to get my Ph.D., I chose immunology so that I could get a better understanding of the underlying causes of inflammatory diseases. And since that time, we've learned so much more about the critical role that inflammation plays in many diseases like neurodegenerative and metabolic diseases, which hadn't initially even been thought of as inflammatory diseases. So it's really exploded as an area to explore therapeutically, and it feels like we're right now on the cusp of being able to really understand how to control inflammation and to induce immune resolution in a safe way. And I have found that Avello, the company I'm at now, made a great match for my interest in exploring how the immune system can be regulated locally for broader effects. So it kind of brought it back full circle for me.
Well, let's jump to that. Let's talk about how your research at Avello is going. And I know that you were in charge of leading the discovery and early clinical development of 3 novel microbial therapeutics. What was this experience like, and what are you looking to do with those therapeutics in terms of the human body?
It's only been 4 years since I joined Avello, less than 4 years, and it's been pretty amazing. And I think what strikes me most when looking back is how quickly we moved, because during that time, we identified the first therapeutic candidates, we got them into the clinic, and we've even now had our first positive clinical results in psoriasis and atopic dermatitis. And that happened in such a short span of time. It's been like a dream actually come true for me. The thing I find really rewarding from the research side is that it usually takes years and years to find out if something that you're exploring preclinically is going to actually work in the clinic on humans. So just to be able to translate the preclinical work into the clinic firsthand has been a really unique opportunity. And as you mentioned, the story of the science behind it all has been really intriguing.
Why do you think you all were able to move so quickly from the preclinic to the clinics? As you said, it takes usually much longer than that.
Yes, so it's the platform, really. It's the fact that we're using single strains of commensal bacteria that have been isolated from the human small intestine. So we have a library of these microbial strains, and the microbe is the medicine. So as opposed to small molecule development or even antibodies where you have to get a hit and then you take that molecule forward and you manipulate it into a more potent or a more effective drug that you can then take into the clinic. Our microbe is the drug. What we have to do is figure out how to manufacture it in a way that will be able to scale it up and it will retain its efficacy and its potency, and we'll be able to get it to a level that we can administer it to patients. So that's one thing. We don't have 5 years of lead op in that sense. We just start with the medicine itself. The second thing is that because these microbes are commensal bacteria and they're not engineered, we don't need to do a large preclinical toxicology package. We've gotten permission from the regulators to put together our preclinical, sort of a limited preclinical tox package, and then explore the safety in humans. So that's cut out, I don't know how many years, 5, 7 years of work when you start from the initial hit to get into the patient.
Fascinating. That's really exciting. And in addition to the psoriasis, you're also working on several other difficult to treat diseases for patients. Can you talk a little bit more about the pipeline?
Yes. So we have, these, if I back up a moment, the microbes, because they're working through the small intestine to impact peripheral diseases. This is actually, it's the fundamental concept of our microbes, but it's also a really, I think, something that was fairly non-obvious that we've worked through from the very beginning. We started with the observation made at the Mayo Clinic that an orally administered single strain of commensal bacteria could inhibit inflammation, not just in the gut, but in other parts of the body as well. So in a mouse model of arthritis, the strain could inhibit joint inflammation. And in a model of multiple sclerosis, the same strain could inhibit inflammation in the spinal cord and prevent loss of limb function. And in skin inflammation models, the same thing happened. So we saw all of these things happening just from a locally contained microbe in the gut, and which was having an effect on the periphery. So these were really exciting observations, and also many closely related strains don't do the same thing. So the question was, what was it about this particular strain that was allowing us to see these effects? And at the same time, there was a lot of progress being made in the academic community around linking the effects in the gut with other parts of the body. And, I think if you're familiar with this area, these links are now being called the gut-brain axis, or the gut-lung axis, or the gut-liver axis. And it's basically showing that the small intestine is connected to the rest of the body via multiple distributed systems like the immune system, the enteric nervous system, and the metabolic system. And that in different diseases, what's happening in the gut can affect what is happening elsewhere in the body. So it made sense that the bacteria that we were studying and that we knew were restricted to the gut might be using those links to affect peripheral inflammation. And since then, we've made a lot of progress in understanding how the local interactions in the gut can lead to systemic significant effects on distal immune responses in the skin, for example. So then that leads us back to our initial clinical trials in psoriasis, and more recently we've gotten data from atopic dermatitis. But of course, we're not just looking at skin. We're going to be looking at other body processes. We have some preclinical programs that I'm not going to talk about right now, but we're interested in other areas like neuroinflammation and metabolic diseases, and we also have an oncology candidate.
Really fascinating. Do you see this as the future of medical research? I mean, it sounds like you have hit upon some really groundbreaking thinking in terms of how to control so many diseases just through the gut.
We're working with microbes now, but really the point of what we're doing is to show that there's a connectivity between the small intestine and the rest of the body, and we call that syntax. That's what we've coined it as. So small intestinal axis. So we are initially using microbes to harness that biology. There could be other things that come down the road, other types of molecules that might do the same thing. So I do feel like we're on the cusp, as I said, of a new type of immune control, where you don't have to have a systemic drug to have an effect on part of the body where that drug itself might have additional pharmacology that you don't want, or off-target effects, right? This is why we think that control through syntax is going to be so safe and yet effective at the same time. And actually that's playing out right now in the clinic.
Fascinating. And you know, obviously you can only talk about so much of this, but it's really, really exciting to hear what the future might hold. So thank you for sharing all of that information with us. You know, at the same time, even though you had great success in moving so quickly from preclinic to clinic, we all know that R&D is fraught with any number of pitfalls that can deter or derail a program. And keeping scientists, especially, you know, young scientists up and coming, inspired and motivated is challenging. And you are a team leader working with more than a dozen immunologists and chemists working on discovering and developing therapies. How do you keep your team inspired? And how do you then overcome some of the challenges that naturally occur when developing new drugs?
That's a great question. We think about that all the time because, as you say, there's so many challenges to making a medicine, and how do you stay resilient? And I think a lot of it is about finding your own personal meaning in the process. So we all come to this for different reasons. It could be very personal. It could be from the science side. It can be from other interests that we have. And so I think you really have to focus on what it is that brought you to the field or to the particular company or area of exploration, and keep focusing on that. And, you know, I think really the answer to that question broadly was in what you said. You know, we're striving to make medicines that are accessible and affordable to patients around the world. And that is an inspiring vision. So, you know, how do we keep that vision alive for people on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis? And one thing I really like about working at Avello is that we are still small enough that scientists working in the discovery and research end of things can see the whole process from discovery to clinical development. So they do preclinical experiments that actually inform our clinical strategy. And they get to see this, they get to experience this. And every person in the company can feel that they have an impact, a direct impact on the development of our medicines, and then, of course, ultimately on patients' lives. So I would say that our commitment to patients is ultimately what inspires the team to keep striving. And when I think about this, when it comes down to it, we're basically just a bunch of people who really believe in what we do, and we don't want to let anyone down. We don't want to let each other down, and we don't want to let the patients down.
I love that. And I think that is a very unusual place to be too, because if you look at the larger, you know, pharma companies or biopharma companies or biotech companies, they don't always have that privilege of seeing it, as you said, from preclinical to clinical, because it gets handed off. So you really do have a unique opportunity there.
Yes, no, and I, you know, actually it's funny because I tell people that, I tell the junior scientists in my groups, you don't know what an opportunity this is to be able to see all of this going through, because exactly as you said, it gets handed off. You work on something for 10 years and then it goes someplace else, and maybe later on you'll hear about it. But this is a place where we've got people from process development and manufacturing sitting in on our research meetings, because we move so quickly that they need to know what's coming down the pipeline for them. They start working on things. We're doing preclinical studies that are impacting the process all the way along. And it's, I hope that that's very rewarding for the people in my group.
It's awesome. Talk to me about mentoring. I know that that's very important to you in guiding that next generation of up and coming scientists. Why is this a particular interest to you?
Well, I think it's because I believe that mentorship is one of the most important ways that we basically invest in our future. So it should be a large part of training the next generation of scientists. And we have to do that. That is our responsibility. It takes years and years of accumulated experiences to learn what we know. So for those of us who are a bit older, hopefully we know a bit more than those who are just starting out their journey. So if we want to make real progress, we have a responsibility to teach what we've learned to those who are starting out on their own. And so as an example, my own experiences with mentors probably changed the course of my life and my career, certainly. As an undergrad, I worked as a lab assistant, washing glassware and autoclaving pipettes and cleaning equipment. And the head of the lab I was working in, who also happened to be head of the department, so he was a pretty big guy, actually took a lot of time to teach me the basics. So how to use a micropipetter, how to pour a gel and run a gel, and how to use dialysis tubing. I mean, all of these really, really basic things. And he was kind and patient, and he, along the way, he instilled, the concept of good scientific principles. And at the time, I thought, wow, this is amazing. But now I realize that he was making an intentional investment in me, and he saw it as a responsibility. And it was because of him that I eventually got my Ph.D. and developed a career in science. So I know that I benefited from the advice and perspective of the mentors, the many mentors over my career, and I feel very grateful to them. And so now I feel the same responsibility to invest in my team.
That's excellent. Do you have any, particular tips that you can share that make for a successful mentoring relationship? Things that you might have learned along the way? That personal investment is certainly part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things. It's hard to sort of put them all together, but I think one of the things that I find so gratifying, and I think is really important, is understanding that mentorship is often basically about helping someone figure out what the meaningful questions are that they need to be answering. So with many scientists, many young scientists especially, there's so many questions, so many things that they want to understand. There's so many things we can do, and there's so many ways, and technical ways, and also fairly complex ways that we can answer questions, and they want to do everything. And so as a mentor, I think one of the things that you can do for somebody is to really help them to understand what are the meaningful questions, what's important for moving a program forward, to get to an answer, or ultimately to make a medicine that patients want and that they need. So it's very gratifying when you can help somebody develop that sense, that mindset that allows them to ask themselves, what is the key question, or the thing that will lead to an important decision. And then, of course, when they start applying that, and they run up against a challenge, and they work through it, and they find a solution, and they're excited about it, it's great as a mentor to be able to share in their excitement. It's a really great moment.
That's awesome. Over the last 4 years, can you identify one or two of the most rewarding aspects of leading your research teams? What have been a couple of high points for you?
Yeah, there have been so many, so many things. The people, of course, just on a very basic level, getting to know people, and again, to go back to a previous theme, these are young, really enthusiastic scientists, and so getting to sort of experience the learning process, especially around drug development, seeing it through their eyes, and watching them grow and develop, and also seeing their dedication in working hard, working in a new area, working out the science behind a novel therapeutic approach. That's probably been one of the most rewarding aspects, is having this great group of people, of scientists, with kind of this unknown science, and putting all of their skills together, working together, and putting forward hypotheses, and then carrying out the experiments, getting to answers, and then moving forward, and then now putting together sort of this foundational biology for us. And now, this biology, it feels like, we all accept it, and this is the basis of our therapeutics. But when we started out, this was not at all obvious that this was true or that it would work. So having it play all the way through from basic research to a clinical result has been really amazing.
That is amazing. That's awesome. How would you describe yourself as a leader, or how would your team describe you as a leader?
That's a good question. So, the way I see myself as a leader is I think that everybody has their great skills, their capability, right? Everyone has at least one thing that they're really awesome at, and everybody has something that they need to develop. And I see my my job is to really set the course and the direction of where we're going with our research, to ask the questions that prompt people to do the right experiments, to connect us, to connect my group with the executive team so that they have an understanding of the strategy of the company and why we're doing what we're doing, so that they can feel that they are empowered to do what they need to do to support the goals of the company. And part of that is also, I'm fairly hands-off, and that might be good for some people, and maybe it's not good for others. But I have to say, I'm definitely not a micromanager. So what I do like to do is get people to understand what it is that they should be doing, that they can be doing, and then let them kind of go off and do it and explore it, and then come back for guidance or come back for feedback. But I really like people to go off and learn on their own and explore.
Excellent. Right now we're living in some unprecedented times. How has the pandemic impacted your teams and how you lead them? Has it been an appreciable difference?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because so many things happened as a result of the pandemic. But one thing that I think we had an advantage during this time is that our group had been together for over the last 3 years. So we all know each other really, really well. So when we had to kind of step back and think about reducing the number of scientists who go into the lab, or setting up more Zoom meetings or team meetings, and how are we going to communicate results, and how are we going to have really good scientific discussions, it helped a lot that we already knew and understood each other's personalities. Some things have emerged. I think we've all learned more about ourselves and our own levels of resilience. But during this time, in some ways, I think we have more discussions than we used to before, because we kind of have these open channels now, where rather than saying, "Oh, can I find somebody and they happen to be in the lab and I'll wait to talk to them," now everyone is on media, everyone's on Teams, everyone's checking their phone all the time, for good or bad. And so when you send out a question, when you message a question, they come back almost immediately now, which never happened before. So for me, actually, it's been great. And it's also kind of fun where you can have a team chat and you put forward a question, and in literally in 2 minutes you see 3 people starting to respond, and everyone's sort of piling in. So that's something that we actually didn't have before, and I would really like to continue that after we renormalize, after we all do go back to the lab, which hopefully will be soon.
Yeah, I love, I asked that question because we're always looking for those silver linings out of such great tragedy that, everybody has experienced over the last year. So that's a great silver lining. So thanks for sharing that. Just to change tacks just a little bit, I know you're also involved in a number of different nonprofit organizations, such as Global Arts Live and PATH or PATH. Tell me a little bit about these groups and why these are important to you. You're a very busy person. I can imagine that you have a lot of balls in the air all the time. So to devote some part of your life and your resources to these organizations, I'm curious.
Yeah, thanks, Taryn. You're right that it is very important to me. And my husband and I have chosen to be involved in the 2 organizations you mentioned, Global Arts Live and PATH. And I think the reason simply is that even though we're busy, I think it's important that we make time in our lives to support, particularly nonprofit organizations, to go out and try to make, to try to have a broader impact on society as a whole. And so we all have to do our part. This is the way we do ours. And the way to do it, I think, is to find something that resonates with you, right? Your personal mission, perhaps, or the things that you're trying to achieve in life. So, for example, PATH is a global health organization. It's headquartered in Seattle, and its mission is to work with countries to develop new technologies to help address health issues like infectious diseases, maternal fetal nutrition, women's health issues. And what I really like about them is that they focus on health equity. and using technology and innovative approaches to expand access to healthcare for people who really have very little access to healthcare.
I love that health equity, because it's it's so important right now.
Yeah.
I think the pandemic has shown brought such a bright spotlight on where there are so many areas of inequity in our healthcare system around the globe.
Yes. Yes. No, you're absolutely right. It's interesting because PASS, in general has focused around maybe emerging countries that really have even, really, really poor health care infrastructure. But you're right. The pandemic has shown that even in, a country like the United States, it's really not equitable in many cases. And the pandemic has revealed that to us. So I think actually something like PASS, which it's not just working overseas. I mean, they have a lot of initiatives in the United States as well. And so I think this, it's the time for something like that, for an organization like that to be spotlighted.
So now tell me about Global Arts Live.
So Global Arts Live, on the other hand, outside, different from PASS, it's actually a really small local organization that operates out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the mission is to bring world music and dance performances to the Boston area. And when we moved to the Boston area, my husband and I, we really enjoy music. And so we started going to a lot of these concerts and performances put on by Global Arts Live. And we thought, wow, this is a really great little company. And so we wanted to get more involved in it and support it. It's so small, it's not the Boston Ballet. It's not the Boston Symphony Orchestra. They have about 6 people that run this group, and they've been doing it for over 20 years. And, I think it's really important to support the small groups as well as the larger ones. And so although these PASS and Global Arts Live seem on the surface like they're unrelated, what ties them and resonates for me, what ties them together is that they both provide connections between us and the rest of the world. And I feel that a lot of issues in the world and even in our own country arise from xenophobia. So this fear of things that we don't understand. And the fear drives pretty bad behavior and outcomes for everybody. So it's important for me to support groups that try to open up our understanding of other cultures through something like music and dance, which is pretty non-political, right? So of the things in the world that I think you can get people to relate to across all spectrums, all political spectrums, it's music and cats for some reason, or pet ownership. But I'm focusing on music right now, and also through health equity initiatives that allow us to better understand what patients in other countries have to deal with. So those are the two things. That's the underlying theme that resonates for me, and that's why we support both of these groups.
It's such a wonderfully profound feeling there that, you're looking for that connection that unites us on the most basic level, and it's music, dance, and health. I mean, health knows no political affiliation, and such as the virus. It doesn't know who you are, right? It doesn't care who you are. So, well, thank you for sharing those stories and why these organizations are so important to you. And it really is quite inspiring, and it gives me hope for the future that there are so many people out there like you who are willing to invest their time and energy to move the world forward. So thank you. So we ask this of all of our podcastees, and I'm going to ask you, put you on the spot. Can you tell me about an accomplishment or a wow moment that either shaped your career or changed the trajectory of your career? And I know you're going to say there's quite a few of them, but I'm going to ask you to narrow it down to one if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, absolutely. I did think about this for a while, and I did manage to winnow it down to one that I would like to share. And I talked a little bit about this earlier, but for me, it was probably taking the leap from working in larger companies into a small biotech. So Evelo Biosciences is it's small, and when I started, there were only 36 people, and not only was it a small company, my first small company, but it had a novel platform, and as I described earlier, very novel science essentially unproven science. So it was a pretty big leap for me, and I was both a little scared, or maybe more than a little scared, but also really excited to take the risk. It felt like it was the time for me to make that jump, and it was a real change. And I would say for me, it was a real change for the better. I saw how quickly we could move when everybody passionately shared the same vision and put all their will and energy behind a single goal. And the way I describe it often is like being part of a laser beam. You know, how people talk about being in the zone or the flow, and that's kind of how it feels. We're all in the same boat, and we're rowing in the same direction, to use that metaphor. And I got a real sense of how much a small group of people can do when they're committed, and actually when they like each other. That's the other thing. You know, there's a real camaraderie. Everyone has, you know, a reasonably good sense of humor about things, and I think we work together really well. So ultimately, that made me see myself differently. It made me realize that I could do more than I had thought I could before, because here we were, such a small group of people, and we were just moving this forward. And, you know, ultimately, if things continue to play out, we will develop medicines for patients with important unmet need, and we'll get there very quickly, hopefully. And that's something that, for me, you know, I wouldn't say exactly it was a bucket list item, but it was something that is really like a dream.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And, you know, as the saying goes, you know, there's nothing that a small committed group of people can't do. So I want to thank you so much, Dr. Itano, for spending some time with us, for sharing your really inspirational story, and for shedding some light on a really groundbreaking technology that we're going to be looking forward to seeing what's going to come in the future. I think the developments are going to be quite extraordinary if everything plays out, and you're really on the cusp of something big here. So thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Oh, thank you, Tara. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast. And thanks to HBA for making this episode possible. For more information, visit hbanet.org. And don't forget to check out our other WOW episodes at pharmavoice.com/wow. This 2021 program is copyrighted by PharmaLinks, LLC.